Shalom, welcome back to the city of Refuge, Homestead, where we talk about faith, family, sustainability, in addition to sharing the development of our 5-acre property. Today, I'm going to be showing you guys how to make sourdough starter. If you haven't already, please check out my sourdough bread video. I'm going to link it in the description. Thank you to everyone who has liked the video, dropped a comment, and subscribed to the channel. We appreciate everyone who has joined us on this journey and is following along and has been cheering us on. We appreciate you. So let's get into it. Making sourdough starter is a labor of love, but you can do it. You can certainly do it. For me, it was a skill that I really wanted to learn to be able to increase my self-sustainability within my family. Also, it is a recipe that can be passed down from generation to generation. So I love the idea of being able to pass it down to maybe my daughter in the future, if I have one, or even just sisters who want to make bread and want to do it in a way that is more organic. So let's get into the ingredients. So the first ingredient you're going to need is flour. The rule of thumb is for you to use a flour that is unbleached. I'm using rye. You can use whole wheat or all-purpose flour as long as it's unbleached. The next thing you're going to need is water. Make sure you're using water that is purified or filtered water. You don't want to use water that has any chlorine, so that's like sink water. You can use bottled water. Don't use sink water. You're also going to need a mason jar or a clear glass jar. The recipe calls for a pint-sized jar and then for you to transfer the sourdough starter into a quart-sized jar later down in the process because she starts to add more flour at the end. But I'm just going to start off in the quart jar just because it is easier for me and I don't want to be transferring things. But I'm just letting you know as per the recipe. You also need something that can cover it, and you want to use something that is airy. So I'm using a coffee filter. You can also use a paper towel or just put a top, a jar, to be able to let some of that air come in. You want to have a spatula or a spoon, something you can use to stir it, and obviously a measuring cup. Making sourdough starter is about a 7-day process. And to be honest, it may not even be 7 days. When I made mine the first time, it took 14 days before it fermented or before I was able to use it to be able to make bread. So I'm going to take you through the process as per the recipe. So it can vary depending on the climate that you live in. The heat is better for the fermentation process. Sourdough starter loves heat. So if you're in a warm climate or you have the heat on, it's more likely for the sourdough starter to ferment faster than if you were in a colder environment. So like mentioned, it's a 7-day process from start to finish. On the first day, you're going to add 1/4 of a cup of flour, 1/4 of a cup of water. Then you're going to allow your starter to sit in a warm place for 24 hours. On day 2, you're going to check on your starter. It may not have any activity at that point. It's fine. Trust the process. You're going to add another 1/4 of a cup of flour and 1/4 of a cup of water. On day 3, you're going to check your starter. You may have some bubbles. but you're gonna add in another step. You're gonna discard about 1/4 of a cup of your starter, and then you're going to add in fresh flour and fresh water, which will also be the same as the previous days, which is 1/4 of a cup of water, 1/4 of a cup of flour. On day 4, you're gonna do the same thing as on day 3. You're going to discard some of your starter, add in fresh flour and fresh water, and at this point, you might start seeing some activity, lots of bubbles. If you don't, continue, trust the process. So day 5 is where the recipe calls for you to do a 1/2 cup of flour and a 1/2 cup of water. You're still gonna do your discarding. So you're gonna discard, you're going to put a 1/2 cup of flour, a 1/2 cup of water, and then you're going to allow your sourdough again some time to ferment. Now, at this stage, you might start seeing some real live action here. This is like day 5, day 6, day 7. So day 1, we're gonna put in 1/4 of a cup of flour. I'm using rye flour because that's what I have on hand, but you can use any unbleached flour, whole wheat or all-purpose. You want to use 1/4 of a cup of filtered water. You don't want to use sink water because it has chlorine and other things that can affect the fermentation process. You want to mix. And you're really looking for, I'm just trying to get those dry bits at the bottom. And you're really looking for pancake batter. So when you're mixing your sourdough starter, if you need to add more water, I would suggest maybe using like a tablespoon at a time. So you don't add too much and then you gotta add more flour. So that's what I would do anyway. So you wanna scrape down the sides. I just get in the habit of doing that. And then you wanna cover. And at this point, I would pick a name for your sourdough starter. If you name your sourdough starter, leave the name down in the comment section. I wanna hear from you. I'm gonna call this Herbert 2.0. If you saw my sourdough bread video, you know that my original sourdough starter's name is Herbert. You're gonna cover it with, I'm using a coffee filter, something that can allow air to come in and out. You can also use a paper towel, or you can use a top, but just keep it ajar. And now you wanna put your starter, which is Herbert 2.0, in a warm place.
24 hours later.
Shalom, we're at day 2 of feeding our sourdough starter. I hope you've named your starter by now. I'd like to hear from you in the comment section. And we're just gonna do the same thing we did yesterday. We're gonna feed our starter 1/4 of a cup of flour. Just gonna take it off. I don't see any action right now. So if you don't see anything, don't be surprised. Of a cup of purified water. Gonna give it a good stir. I'm gonna scrape down the sides. Cover them back up. This is my Herbert 2.0. I'm going to cover them back up and put them in a warm place to rest for another 24 hours.
24 hours later.
Shalom! Today is day 3 of the sourdough starter, so let's check it out. Actually, I'm gonna be honest, I already looked at it this morning and it is very bubbly. I don't know if you guys can see. There were more bubbles this morning. Since then it's decreased, but it's a good sign that we're going in the right direction. So we're just gonna move on to the next feeding. But we're gonna do something a little bit different. So now it's day 3. We're gonna discard about half, 1/4 of a cup, and then we're going to feed it with some fresh flour and water. So let's get into it. So I'm gonna take out 1/4. I'm actually just gonna eyeball it. You can use your, I'm gonna put a little bit back. You can use your discard for other baked goods, but I'm just gonna throw it out. Some people like to save it and use it to put in other things so they don't feel that it's wasteful, but for me, I'm just gonna toss it. So I'm gonna add in 1/4 of a cup of flour. One-fourth of a cup of purified water. And I am going to mix. And I'm gonna put him back in a warm place. Sourdough starter loves heat, so keep it in a warm place and you will see some activity. I was just talking to my mom and her sourdough starter was giving her a hard time, and that's what I suggested. Keep it by a warm place. So that's day 3. We're gonna cover it, and I will see you guys tomorrow on day 4. Shalom.
24 hours later.
Shalom. So today is day 4. So we're going to check on Herbert 2.0 and see how he's doing. So right now he smells very yeasty, which is a good indication that he's on his way. There are some bubbles, but not as much as yesterday. So I'm just going to let you guys see what that looks like. I hope you guys can see that. So we're just going to do the same thing we did on day 3. We're going to discard 1/4 of a cup, and then we're going to add in 1/4 of a cup of fresh flour and water. So as always, I'm going to eyeball it. You guys use your measuring cup if you're not sure. So as you can see, it's very runny. There was some water at the top, which is called hooch. So if you happen to see water at the top, don't be alarmed. It's just hooch. It's just the sourdough's way of letting you know that he or she is hungry. Day 4 complete. See you guys tomorrow for day 5. Shalom.
24 hours later.
Shalom. So today is day 5. So let's see how our starter is doing. My coffee filter is stuck. It's a little crusty at the top. Starting to have a little bit of a smell. I smelled it yesterday. I hope you guys can see. There are lots of bubbles. It is very active. It has been very warm in my house, so like mentioned, sourdough starter really loves warmth and becomes very active when it's warm. So he's going in the right direction. So what we're going to do is we're going to discard just about a little more than half. I just poured out a little more than a half of the starter that was in there. And I'm going to give it a feeding. So a half a cup and a little under a half a cup of water. My starter did start to have a little bit of runniness on top. That's called hooch. Hooch is basically the sourdough starter's way of letting you know that it's hungry. So this is the consistency. It's a little thicker than pancake batter today because we want to give it a good feeding. We don't want the starter to be hungry because we want to test to see if in 12 hours the sourdough starter doubles in size. I suspect that it will for me, only because it has been very warm in my house. And if that is the case, you would have made your first sourdough starter. I just had to run and get a new coffee filter, sorry. Because mine was all crusty. So I'm just gonna cover him up, put him back in a warm place, and check in 12 hours to see if he's doubled in size. This is the time when you're gonna put your rubber band around your starter, or you're just gonna put a little like permanent marker. Well, you can use permanent marker if you want. It comes off with alcohol. Or you can use a marker, a rubber band, just so that you can make sure that your sourdough starter is doubling in size. So I'm gonna put my rubber band on, and I am going to wait 12 hours to see if he has doubled. And if he has doubled in size, then I know that he's ready to make basic sourdough starter recipes. I'll see you back tomorrow on day 6.
24 hours later.
Shalom, good morning. Today is day 6, and my sourdough starter is bubbly and active. And as you can see, he has doubled in size, and he has lots of wonderful bubbles. You can see some of the craters there. I'm gonna see if you can hear it. I'm gonna lean it. I'm gonna try to lean it. I'm using my phone, so I'm gonna try to lean it so you can hear. I don't know if you can hear it, but it sounds hollow at the bottom. So that's a good sign that the starter is active. I'm gonna open it up so you can see what it looks like. He has some bubbles at the top. Not as much as I would typically like, but he is active. Now, he is not mature enough for bread. So typically your starter would be, depending on the environment, if you're, if your house is warmer, your sourdough starter would typically be active within 7 days. That's just the overall general baseline, but that there are some variables in that, because like I said, environment plays a factor. So after 7 days and your starter is bubbling, doubling in size, it is active enough for basic baking needs. For example, cookies, biscuits. You can add it to pizza dough. I wouldn't use the sourdough to bake bread yet, only because I would want to test it to see if it's consistently doubling in size after a feeding. If I can recall correctly, I did not use my sourdough starter until after 2 weeks of consistent feeding and seeing that the starter doubled in size after every feeding. And then I tried to bake bread. Generally speaking, the time range between having a mature starter to be able to bake bread is from 2 to 6 weeks. So I know that it might seem daunting, but you're gonna have to keep feeding it and discarding for another week or so until you see consistent doubling in size. Once you've seen that consistently, I would go for it and try to make the bread. It's really one of those things that is intuitive. It's trial and error. Some other good indications that your sourdough starter is mature is you'll start to smell it. So when you go to smell your sourdough starter, does it smell sweet? Does it have a sweet, yeasty smell? Not a vinegary, lemony smell, but like a nice little sweet, yeasty smell. And you'll know when you know. Like once you smell it and you know, like you'll know. And also, just so you know, if your sourdough is not like you see, mine's is kind of like right above, I still consider that active. It's dropped since only because you see it doubled on this side, but if you see it coming up above the line, but it's not quite this, like you see, mine's is here, and it's like, you know, just a little under the doubling, that's still active. I've had my starter for 2 years, and it doesn't always, you know, ooze out the top, and like you see on some of these social media posts, that's still active. So I would give it another week, because we've already completed 1 week. I would give it another week of feeding consistently, of feeding and discarding. And if you consistently see doubling in size, then I would go for it and try to make a loaf of bread. But generally speaking, I think the range is 2 to 6 weeks. And if I recall correctly, I think within my first 2 weeks, including the first week we started, and then I did it another week, and I was able to see consistent, I think it was another week and a couple of days actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I consistently saw doubling. I went for it. I tried to make bread, and it came out pretty good. So trust the process. You got this. That's the end of the video. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching the City of Refuge Homestead.